Okay, hey everybody. Thank you for joining us this evening for our wonderful sweep event and guest speaker. To get things started, I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Janae Sweeney-Slatine, and I'm the undergraduate programs coordinator for the BSW program. And I want to tell you a little bit about what the sweep program is, because we do have some students here who haven't had the opportunity to participate in sweep. And we have some community members who don't know what sweep is. So SWEEP stands for Social Work Education Enhancement Program, and it's a program that we started last spring for all social work students to participate in during their first semester as social work students, for BSW students. And this program is a way that we can support our students as they transition into the social work major and UT. We use the SWEEP program for wonderful events like this, but we also use it as a means to provide peer mentorship to our first semester social work students, and also community building activities. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass this off to Dean Huff. Thank you.
Thanks, Janan. We are so excited tonight to have Kim Young here with us, presenting and discussing all things social work with you all. So a little bit about Kim. Kim has an LCSW. She got her MSW in 2013 from Virginia Commonwealth University. Her BA in 2010 from San Jose University. I hope you've had a chance to look at her website, dopeblacksocialworker.com. On it, she says, I am a licensed clinical social worker in the Commonwealth of Virginia with over a decade of experience working alongside at-promise youth, families, and communities. And we are so excited, Kim, to have you here with us tonight and presenting. Welcome.
Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you for keeping it brief, because like I kind of mentioned to you earlier, it's hard, right? Like when people read your bio, especially when you're smothered in awkwardness, you'd be like, oh, that makes me feel a certain way. But I am so grateful to be here with y'all this evening to just kind of move through what I'm just kind of noting as a social work thriving kit. So not a survival kit, but a thriving kit. I'm going to go ahead and start getting my screen ready to share with y'all. And I invite you to even, introduce yourself, say hello, like let me know what squad you repping, BSW, MSW, doctoral, community member, career social worker. We got people just being nosy. You just here for the party, whatever brings you. Go ahead and drop your squad name in the chat box while I get the screen ready. I see we have some MSW students, BSW in the building. More okay, squad. BSW might be showing out tonight. Love to see it. All right, let me get this in presenter mode, move some things around on my screen so I can still see the chat box. And if y'all can let me know in the chat box, or if your camera's on with a thumbs up, if you can see what I can see, you can see my screen, so I'm not just in an illusion that we're good. Fantastic. All right, y'all. So what I kind of mentioned before is, we talk a lot about just surviving. And as a person, I don't consider myself to be an OG social worker. I'm a young OG, right? Like still in the millennial age range. So I'm not an OG. I don't have multiple decades in the game, but I have about 14 years in social work. And so I've just kind of noticed we talk a lot about just surviving. And I know for a number of years early on in my career, and even as a student, I didn't even know how to thrive in the profession. And there's a way to do it, and the way that I have found to do it. And I'm going to share a little bit about my journey through these three things that I have in my thriving kit that keep me grounded and keep me going, but also through the lens of some of my favorite revolutionaries that have guided my path. So the first thing that I want to touch on in the social work thriving kit is curiosity and the importance of it. And what curiosity has done for me and what it has ultimately allowed me to experience as a social worker, but also as a Black social worker, a Black woman social worker, and how necessary curiosity is. And so I'm gonna introduce y'all, maybe some of you are already familiar with Miss Ida B. Wells, but she is one of my social work heroes, but also one of my favorite revolutionaries. And so she has a quote, and it says, "The way to right wrongs is to turn the light of truth upon them." And so I can just think about myself, and I'm going to show you when I had a perm and everything back in 2017. I ain't had no perm in my head for over a decade, but back in 2007, when I was a young undergrad student at San Jose State University, I'm down there in the corner. This was a young lady who was full of curiosity. But even before getting to undergrad, I was a young person in middle school. I can recall a young person in middle school that was just full of anger, but didn't know what the anger was, right? It didn't really have a name. It didn't have a place. I just knew that I had a lot of feelings and a lot of angers about things, about life, injustices, things that Black folks were experiencing, brown folks at my high school were experiencing, because I'm originally from San Diego, California. So the majority of the folks that I went to school with and also learned to organize with were Chicanos and Chicano populations. And so I've been angry for a mighty long time. But what I did notice about myself is in middle school is when I started to find my voice, right? And in high school is when I became nurtured by adult co-accomplices. I had teachers who poured into me in high school what I saw as anger, they saw it as something else. I think they saw it as some sort of light or spark, and they weren't afraid of it, but decided to pour into me. And then in undergrad, I found community in terms of how to go about my advocacy and organizing work. But what I had not found by undergrad, y'all, was social work. Still had no idea what it was. I don't even recall really hearing about it, reading about it, seeing it. I definitely had misconceptions like a lot of people, but had no idea what social work was in undergrad. I graduated with my bachelor's in behavioral science and sociology. And so I wasn't introduced to social work till after I graduated and started working post-undergrad. And so my MSW program, I found this picture on my old computer, y'all. This is my desk from from graduate school. And I wonder if this looks familiar to some people in terms of like just stuff everywhere, trying to write a paper in the heat of the night, trying to make sense of all these articles and books you ain't read. Because I didn't read the assigned readings that was in the syllabi. I didn't do it. I didn't buy all them books my professors told me to buy either. But I certainly found a way to move through my MSW program. But this was also the place where I really entered into this state of just confusion and even more anger as an MSW student. I experienced a lot of trauma in my MSW program. A lot of racial trauma was exacerbated for me in my MSW program, and I didn't know how to make sense of it. But I knew what I was going through didn't feel right, nor did it feel normal, but it also made me question if I even belonged. I struggled to make it through my MSW program tremendously. And I'm quite shocked, to be very honest with y'all, that I made it to the other side because I didn't think I was going to do it. I'm a first generation everything. You name it, like I'm a first generation undergrad, grad school. Like to this day, my family still think I'm a doctor. And for some of, the other first generation students who might be joining us this evening, I wonder how much that is your experience as well. Like you go to college and graduate, people just think you a doctor when you're the first one to do it in your family. But my MSW program were also my formative years of really trying to figure out what is my place, not only in the field of social work, but in life. And I don't even know in retrospect, or actually I can say with confidence in retrospect that I didn't even offer myself enough grace to stay curious and be confused and not shame myself for the anger that I was experiencing, but ultimately understanding that my anger was transforming into rage, but the rage was not new. I think a lot of folks who find themselves in the field of social work are the ones who are angry and have rage about things that are happening in the world. And I had been that person since middle school, and my family jokingly used to call me, you know, the rebel. And my feelings was kind of hurt behind that, because I thought they thought I was being difficult, or, you know, I was hard to engage. But then it kind of made sense. Like, I've always been the one making noise about something, right? But I didn't really know what it meant to make noise about something, but also how to organize it and to create change. And so when I was introduced to social work, not the formal way of being introduced to it like school teaches us, but when I made it out of grad school and started working, I really discovered like social work, the frameworks of the profession gave my rage a home. And so I was able to actualize a lot of the things that I have been dealing with and feeling and experiencing for decades, like just 15, 16 years of just having rage and not knowing what to do about it, how to turn it into action. And social work allowed me the ability to do that. And so when I made it out of undergrad, grad school, and started working, when you heard a little bit of my bio, I use the term at promise. And so I have been working for a decade with populations that for some reason we like to say they're at risk, but I truly believe they are at promise. And so this is the population that has given me meaning, the population that welcomed me in, right? So what you're seeing right here is a picture that one of my former tiny humans, who's not really that tiny, this kid was bigger than me, had drew of me back when I was working in residential treatment. And to this day, I keep a box full of memories from folks that I have worked with over the years, kids, families, groups that I have worked with from over the years. You know, it has coloring sheets, jewelry they would make, little tokens and toys they would give me, drawings, all of these things. And so I began to understand throughout going through these different phases in my career that all my rage made sense, and I had to learn how to welcome it. But I also had to remember that some of the rage just came from this place of curiosity. I just have questions. Like, why is the world like this? Why do people suffer? Why do some have more than others, right? What makes it possible for white supremacy to still persist? Why is it hard for me to just stand in my full purpose without having a voice in the back of my head trying to tell me I don't belong? Those are just questions of curiosity, right? And so it's important to acknowledge that when we're thinking about how we thrive in this profession, I believe we are naturally curious beings. You can't be a social worker and not have curiosity. I don't know if it's possible, but what we have to get to the place to arrive to, and something I really wish I would have known early on in my career, is that I can't shame myself for the curiosity, nor can I allow other people to mute me because I'm curious, because I ask the questions. And you're going to find in your journeys, if you haven't found already, there are people who are going to want to mute you because you're curious. There are people who are going to want to take your voice from you because you're curious. And this does not mean that any one of us is voiceless. Nobody is voiceless. Everybody has something to say. Just a matter of having space, opportunity, and access to say it. But it's also standing firm in your curiosity and not letting people shame you for your questions. And so I have found for an absolute fact that curiosity, it keeps me, meaning it wraps itself around me. It keeps me sustained. It keeps me lifted up, right? And my rage is a thing that fills me. Without curiosity and rage, I'm pretty sure I would have given up a long time ago. But when I combine curiosity and the rage together, because rage is nothing but an energy source, and I have learned how to channel my rage to make change happen, right? And the way we make change happen is because we're curious about things and how they could possibly be if we did fight for change. And so when I put those two things together, I really have discovered that they are critical for me to thrive as a social worker, is that I have to let my curiosity keep me, hold me, provide balance. And I can't shame myself for the rage that I consistently have, but channel it into creating change. And so another one of my favorite revolutionaries, if folks are not familiar with Thich Nhat Hanh, he says that many people are alive, but don't touch the miracle of being alive. And so I refuse not to be alive, which means I also refuse to let the social work profession snatch my joy and my happiness. And I wish I would have given myself permission throughout my MSW program and well, I didn't go to a BSW program, but even in undergrad, I really wish I would have given myself permission not to allow those things to snatch my joy and to still live and to be alive and to feel all the things. And so courageously continue to ask those questions, y'all. You have to. That's what we're there for. Got to stay present in the work. Meaning, how do we stay in the moment of what we're doing and not get so caught up on the result, not get so caught up on the outcomes, right? But how can we just stay present in the work and do it? And then ultimately feel the things. You got to feel all the things and not shame yourselves for feeling whatever the things are. Because feelings come and go, ebbs and flow, right? They come and go. They don't stick around. And despite what people say, you can't control your thoughts. You can't control your feelings, but you can control how you behave, react, and respond. But we can't necessarily control how we feel and how we think. So we have to allow ourselves to feel the things, let them move in us and move on out and make room for the next set of feelings to come in. And so the second thing that I have in my social work thriving kit, and this is the most important one for me, and it is actually the newest one for me. I would say the last year, I have really settled into acceptance. And I have found in having these conversations with folks around just like radical acceptance, it's a very hard concept to grasp, but it is also the thing that truly has me feeling a form of liberation. And so one of my other favorite revolutionaries, cousin Ayana, she has a quote and it says, "I happen to be Black and woman and I'm unapologetically proud to be both, but that is not the totality of my identity." And so as I move through my journey of acceptance, I understand, and this was just a phrase that I came up with to kind of set myself free from, I guess, trying to put myself into a box of what people told me social work was, right? Because when I was in my MSW program, they made us choose a track. You either had to go clinical or you can choose to go macro. A lot of people, of course, go clinical for a number of reasons. I didn't know there were other options, right? I really didn't. I got into the program and I was following the pack. People was like, "Oh yeah, you have to get your LCSW. It's important that you get licensed, go the clinical track." And so when I got my license and got on the other side of practicing post-licensure, y'all, I discovered I didn't even like doing therapy. I didn't. I'm good at it. I'm really good at it, right? Especially with youth and young adults. I can do it, but I don't like doing therapy. And it really made me reflect on, well, did I make the wrong decision to become a social worker? Because everyone's telling me that social work is therapy. You're supposed to take the clinical route. Social work is therapy, therapy, therapy. And so I legit had a professional identity crisis in 2018 that I didn't even know what to call myself. And so I started my journey around acceptance, and I just sat down one day and I reflected on this kind of idea that, I'm a revolutionary before I'm a therapist. That's who I am before I'm a therapist. And then I'm a Black woman before I'm a social worker, right? So just sitting and accepting that there's duality, right, in existence is a part of how I've just begun to understand how I fit in this work and not how other people believe we should fit in the mold of practicing or doing social work. Another form of acceptance that I have really been grappling with, I would say, since 2009, when I was introduced to Buddhism, is the general idea that pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. we live in a society and we are a part of a system and a profession that truly only exists because people suffer. If people don't suffer, I'm not sure that the way we practice social work in this country would exist. But it doesn't mean that people actually have to suffer. People are going to experience pain. But when we sit back and reflect on all of these systems that we contribute to, behavioral health care, educational, health systems, legal systems, all these systems that our profession contributes to, I did struggle with this idea that, am I causing harm? Am I contributing to the suffering of other people just by the nature of practicing social work within this Western construct of how we do it? And what I have also began to understand is that pain and suffering will outlive you. It's going to outlive me. These things existed before we did. People were suffering before we were born, right? Even before we started doing the work or got into our programs. People were in pain. People were suffering. These things are going to outlive you. You alone cannot end pain and suffering. You alone cannot do it. It does not mean it's not possible, right? But you alone, me, Kim cannot end pain and suffering. And I think for a lot of us that find ourselves in social work, we come in incredibly idealistic, incredibly gonna change the world. Well, no, you won't. You won't change the world, but you'll be able to do something. You're gonna have some level of impact, but you will not change the world. And that's okay to say. Because for me, once I discovered and I mourned, because I did mourn in 2009, 2018 and 2009, I mourned the idea I had of social work, that I couldn't change the world, that I couldn't save, insert population group, and that pain and suffering was going to live beyond me. I also mourned, but I also began to understand that white supremacy and institutional racism will outlive you. It's going to outlive me. It was here before we got here. And truthfully, our profession is wrapped up in it. The foundations of our profession are in white supremacy and institutional racism. But also, as a Black woman, it's not my responsibility to dismantle white supremacy and institutional racism. That's the work of white people. So when I began to accept that it's not my responsibility to dismantle these things and that it's going to outlive me, it gave me perspective of how I actually could practice, how I actually could have an impact, and where I could possibly make change. But here's the distinction that I want to make, y'all. Acceptance is not apathy. There are some people who try to mix the two together, but acceptance is not apathy. Acceptance is just a recognition of what is, what isn't, but also what's possible. Because there's still things possible, even with the, kind of this truth that white supremacy, institutional racism, pain and suffering are going to outlive us all. There are still things possible that require us to maintain hope. Another thing, you're going to cause harm. It'll likely be unintentional. And you might have already done it. I know throughout the course of my career and even currently, I have incidents where I have contributed or caused harm. By nature of practicing, like I said before, of practicing as a social worker in the constructs of like Western civilization, we are going to inevitably, as a profession, cause harm. It's just accepting this is the truth, right? And remaining cognizant of the fact. How do you reduce the incidence of doing so? Even though it's going to happen and you will do it. You can't prevent it. And I wish my young social work self would have known that too. I probably would have slept more at night, took the vacations I needed to take, not respond to the emails I shouldn't have responded to in the wee hours of the morning, right? Turn off my phone. But at the end of the day, we got to continue to fight anyways. I believe it's a part of our calling is to fight. So when I think about what it means to fight and this acceptance of where we are, another one of my favorite revolutionaries is Mr. Emiliano Zapata. And he says, we do not want the peace of slaves nor the peace of the grave, which is why we still must fight, because we're here, which means we get to occupy and take up all the space, right? We organize for change, if that's small, big, or in between. We do it alongside communities and families and those most impacted. We ensure that the people who are proximate to pain are also proximate to the power. We share the power that we have as individuals, because each of you has some, and the power that the social work profession has to really position itself to call for change, if that's large, small, or everything in between. But acceptance has been the thing that has left me feeling the most free I have ever felt as a professional social worker. This last year of my life, when I truly mourned and accepted the idea that suffering is going to outlive me and I cannot end racism, oppression, and harm towards others, y'all, I got so free. I got so incredibly free. And it can be hard to hear because we want to see things change. We want things to get better, and things do change and things do get better. But I don't know if we give ourselves enough credit to actually sit back and watch it happen and celebrate, right? The small successes and the small wins. And the last thing that I have in my social work survival kit is understanding. And so curiosity with acceptance, coupled with some understanding, is my trifecta for just thriving in social work, but then also experiencing freedom and some form of liberation as a professional. And another one of my sets of revolutionaries are all the Black women who are part of the Black liberation movement. I value them deeply. And truth be told, y'all, if you do some research, a number of them are actual social workers, like went to BSW and MSW programs. So if you do some research on the Black liberation movement, women in the Black liberation movement, you will find that a number of them are actually social workers. So I'm in good company. So a quote by Alice Walker, who isn't necessarily directly tied to the Black liberation movement, says that the most common way people give up their power is by thinking they don't have any. And I really wish someone would have let me know, and I would have believed them when they told me. I don't know if I would have in my younger years, but I want y'all to hear this. Like, you have so much power. You have so much power. And I think we have a difficult relationship with power as humans, especially marginalized folks or those who just aren't as proximate to power as other people have a really hard time with concepts of power. But if you look around, white cis men don't. And so they sitting up in that power and they understand what it is, what to do with it, how to access it. Everyone else got some too. And so as social work students, but even social workers who are budding in your careers, you are sitting with so much power to impact change for yourselves, right? For the client populations you're walking alongside, within your institutions of higher learning, but ultimately for yourself. I truly wish I would have understood how to use my power better for me. When I was younger, I was great at using it for other people. And I think social workers are really good at fighting and advocating for other people, not really good at doing it for ourselves. And so I really wish at a younger age, I would have known how to use my power for me, because I'm important, you're important. And you can't do any of this work unless you recognize how important you are and how you have to use your voice and your power to make sure you're advocating for the things that you need as well. Or else it makes it incredibly difficult to stand firm in beliefs alongside community, alongside families, and alongside individuals. And for anybody who kind of hangs out with me on social media or on these internets, y'all know I love me some Frederick Allen Hampton. And this is not because of the movie. The movie just, made it a bit better. But when I tell y'all, he was probably one of my favorite humans to ever walk this planet. And I will not be convinced that Fred Hampton was not a social worker. If you follow his life's work, you will see that Fred Hampton was indeed a social worker who was taken from us far too soon at the age of 21 years old. He has multiple quotes. One that I'm going to share is one that sustains me. It's not my favorite by him, but it's one that sustains me, which is, you have to understand that people have to pay a price for peace. If you dare to struggle, you dare to win. And so a part of my understanding is that we're going to struggle. I'm going to struggle. Personally, professionally, struggle is inevitable. But a part of struggle is also getting you closer to your wins. And this goes along with these ideas of acceptance of what is possible, but also what may not be at the time. But it is important that you stay in the struggle. It gets easy to think that it's better just to leave or walk away from the struggle, because this work is hard. This work is so hard, and we don't give ourselves enough grace, nor do I think we get enough credit for what we do. Like, I don't know what type of social work appreciation month y'all have, but my job ain't do nothing for me. Nothing. Didn't even send me an email, nothing. No gift card to get some coffee, nothing. So this work is by no means easy. It is also incredibly thankless at times. But I think many of us are relatively okay with that, even though a part of, a little ego at times be like, dang, can y'all just say something about us? Can I just get a thank you or something, right? But it's so important that we just stay in the struggle, stay committed to the work, because you don't know. You don't know when it's going to pop. You don't know when the change is going to happen. But we also can't be wedded to seeing it all the way through. And I think for many folks, it's difficult just to have an idea, like, I'm just going to plant seeds and till the dirt. That's it. I may not be around to watch the tree grow or produce any fruit, but I'm just going to plant the seeds, till the soil and plant the seeds. That's a part of staying in the struggle. You don't know what's going to happen from all your good work and all your efforts, all your mistakes, because you're going to make those too. Some of the harm you might cause. But it's important that we don't get discouraged, that we don't walk away from the fight. And remember, if we're going to win, whatever that win looks like for you, you got to stay in the struggle. And this is my absolute favorite quote by Mr. Fred Hampton. And he says, if you walk through life and don't help anybody, you haven't had much of a life. Now, he does not say help everybody, do everything. He says help anybody. And so this quote gives me perspective to understand I cannot and nor will I help everybody. I can help me a whole lot of anybody, so. Right? Each of you can help a whole lot of anybody's. You can't help everybody. You can't do everything, but you can help some anybody's. And so if you walk through life and you don't help anybody, not everybody, y'all, anybody, you haven't had much of a life. So just to recap the social work thriving kit, the things that keep me sustained and keep me going, and maybe they'll offer something for you, is curiosity. Gotta maintain it. Don't allow yourself to be shamed out of your curiosity, and don't ever give it up. The moment I think we give up curiosity, the moment we stop living. and feeling alive. Do not give up your curiosity. Do not sacrifice it. Acceptance. Please, if you hear nothing else, understand acceptance is not apathy. Acceptance is not a loss of hope. For me, and I can only speak for myself, acceptance has been a form of liberation. It has literally set me free to get to a place of acceptance. And then lastly, is just understanding the power you have, right? Understanding how to use that, what to do with it. But then also understanding that you can't do it all, nor is anybody asking you to. So curiosity, acceptance, and understanding. And then lastly, I think that's just my contact page. Why is it doing that? I'm going to open it up for some Q&A. I know I received some questions ahead of time, but y'all, I welcome just some open processing. I really wanted to make time for that. Reflections, processing. I have about 5 questions that folks sent ahead of time, but I invite you to drop those in the chat box. Or if you feel comfortable and courageous and confident, if you want to raise your hand and come off of mute and ask your questions, you can certainly do that. I'm going to stop sharing now and pull up the questions I have while people, I guess, reflect and think if they're going to speak. And make some room for folks to engage in conversation, not just with me, but with each other. So while y'all are thinking, and I don't know if there are any hands raised, one question that I received was, were you concerned about decolonizing the field when you were a student? If so, what advice would you give Black students wanting to continue this work? It's exhausting existing as Black in America. Very, very true. To be honest with y'all, decolonizing wasn't necessarily a popular term when I was in grad school. So it wasn't necessarily something that was talked about, but when I understand the concepts of decolonizing, I'll be honest with you yet again, it was not a concern I had while in grad school. I was literally just trying to get out. Then people was already taking about $50,000 of my money. I just wanted to get out of grad school with my receipt, AKA my MSW degree, and go do something outside of school. And so I understand, right? Like as a student, it can be very insulating as a student, meaning you're around a lot of other people who are engaged in academia, all these concepts, theories, all this stuff. But in many times, like higher ed insulates us from reality. And so I think it's just important, just as you're kind of going through your journey as a student, to understand your time in school is temporary. You're gonna have way more time on the outside, living out the things that you are learning about in your classrooms and writing about and doing research on, where if you find yourself exhausted in an insulated, relatively controlled environment like school, then Lord, I don't know what's going to await you on the other side. And so it's almost picking what the battles are and understanding that I bet you in your 2 years, if you're in an MSW program, or 4 years in a BSW program, you won't be able to decolonize the curriculum while you're there. And so it's also going into this place of acceptance. What is actually possible? What power do I have as a student? How do I want to target my change of impact? Right? Where it's measurable and realistic, but at the same time, not sacrificing your experience as a student or giving up your joy as a student. Because remember, you're paying to be there. So you should be enjoying it. I think I see a hand raised, and then I'll pop in another question that I received ahead of time.
I raised my hand if you have time. So thank you so much for your advice and your talk. Thank you so much. But I have some I think I disagree with you. Make sure if I understand you accurately. When you say that there are, if you see sometime problem, you should sit and watch up what's going on, and after that you could celebrate. I think that I consider that like same you put in water in a bowl or in a swimming pool, and then you don't turn it over and over and over to become fresh, like keep it fresh. If you say let it sit there, it will become collecting dirt and it will not be useful anymore. So I think that if you should see a problem, you must approach it right away and to see how you can solve it, not just look on it. Sometimes, yes, it could be like to watch, but if you have tools to use, you fully go ahead to use it. This is just my opinion.
Yeah, I think I understand. And we might have been saying the same things, right? Like I have agreement in what you're sharing, but I also have began to recognize and accept that every problem is not mine to say something about or to address. I personally, right, like I don't have the energy to do that, nor am I willing to sacrifice other pieces of my joy or human experience to address or try to solve for every problem. I just focus on doing what I can do with the power I have, the information I have, and what I know. I know there are so many problems that exist, but no one has the ability to focus on every single one of them. But if you have tools and resources, and if those, the things that fall within your wheelhouse or lane, then yeah, get loud about it. Problem solve, address.
What I mean, sorry to interrupt you, but what I mean, like a problem, not all a problem. We could not. It's not possible to solve all the problem in the world. It's not like we don't have the magic cane. But I'm saying the problem for the person. You know, what I'm saying like if I have problem, I must approach it and instead leave it. This is what I.
Like interpersonal problems, like a problem with another person.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, yes, that makes sense. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. Another question that came through is, what advice would you give to up and coming, excuse me, wrong one. I'll get to that one next. How can I be an ally, an anti-racist student / future social worker? I guess what I would offer around that question is, I'm not sure if people need any more allies. I think people need co-accomplices, right? Folks are going to put their bodies on the line for liberation and change and social justice work. And I have personal difficulties with anti-racism because it seems like the new sexy thing to say and to talk about and to read and to research and to form book clubs around. But in terms of how to be an ally, I would say be a co-accomplice. I would say lean further away from allyship, because allyship is white comfort, right? When we become co-accomplice, that's when you're putting your body on the line for the fight and staying in the struggle with your full being, right? And so I would say, don't be an ally. And in terms of an anti-racist student or future social worker, I would encourage folks not to just practice anti-racism, but think about the proness, right? How do you practice being pro-Black, right? Or whatever your pro is that you're looking to engage with. So not anti, but pro is where I would encourage you to give some focus to. And I believe I see another hand raised.
Yeah, it was just kind of a follow-up question to that. Kind of what advice would you give to a white social worker or student of social work learning about social work in kind of work? Because I liked what you said earlier when you said that it's not your responsibility to break down white supremacy. It's a white person's responsibility, because it totally is. And that weight shouldn't be put on BIPOC individuals. It should be put on white people. So what advice do you have for students of social work, white students of social work, trying to actively work to break down that, just the institutionalized racism in social work?
I mean, from personal experience, speaking up as a social work student. I think for many of you, if you look around your programs, I know for myself, I didn't see too many people that looked like me in my MSW program. And so there were a whole bunch of white students, in particular white girls, in my MSW program, and rarely did they speak up. And it seemed like it was left to the other folk to always do the speaking up. And so as a student, speaking up in class when things don't sound right, when things don't feel right, when your professors be coming out their neck sideways, because you know they do it. Like, how many times do your professor say something, you be like, what in the world? And it shouldn't always be, right, the Black, brown, and indigenous folks who are speaking up when like these things are happening. But the white students speak up. You got power. Even if it's organized, and I bet you if some white students organized to get a non-tenured faculty removed from that university, y'all would do it quicker than some BIPOC students. And so speak up as a student. Now, as a profession, that's a whole professional outside of school, that's a whole different response. I think I see another hand raised, and I'll grab one of these questions that I have already. Is that Madeline?
Yes, my question was just in regards to, I definitely agree. I think as like a white social work student, my job is to put myself, like you said, put my body on the line, or my kind of words to kind of help out. But like my biggest concern with that is that sometimes I feel like we burden people, and it's not a Black person's burden to answer our questions when we're working on trying to be pro-Black or trying to avoid racism within our things. And sometimes we don't always recognize that. And so I think that's like my biggest concern. And so when we hear those things in classes, what's the best way you would recommend, like forming groups or committees that we can work together? And then how to involve Black voices without burdening them with more work, because it's not their job to dismantle those systems.
Yeah, I think if there was an easy answer, if there was an easy answer, I think things would look radically different across BSW and MSW programs, because it's this very delicate dance and balance of like, how are we not muting the voices of the impacted, but making sure they are proximate to the power and decision making from whatever happens. But then also, how as white folks are we utilizing our power to be able to kind of co-create, co-build, and co-organize for some level of change. And so I think a place to kind of start is, number one, you gotta identify what your target is. That's any form of organizing, like what is the target, right? But then even once you identify your target, even doing power mapping within whoever it is you're building with, all right, what kind of power do we have here as white students? Oh, well, my dad knows the dean, or my mom is an attorney, or like whatever your power that you have as students. And then how can you then leverage that power and then come with a kind of like a bridge, right, to the impacted students, Black, brown, or otherwise, like, hey, we got this power here. We want to be able to see how we can match our power with what you're calling for, but then you're not leading the charge. You are literally just using your power and proximity to white supremacy to then create a bridge for people who don't have access to the power that you have, while they're leading the charge and calling for the change, and they're out front. And I think a lot of, especially I've seen it this last summer with a lot of organizing that happened over the summer, a lot of white folks struggled to sit in the back, but still bring your power forward. Your presence isn't always necessary. Your power is necessary though. So even as students, how do you not be in the front, but your power is there. Your influence is there, the people you're able to connect and build with, but you're not in the front, and you're not the voice calling for the change. It should be the people who are proximate to the pain and the most impacted.
Thank you.
Yeah. Make sure I didn't miss something in the chat.
Yeah, there's one in there from Patrick. Do you see it, Kim?
Yeah. So I'll read it out loud for y'all, for those who don't have access to the chat box. It says, hi, Kim, grateful for your time and wisdom. First heard you speak on the Melanated Social Work podcast, where I got thinking about my role as a white man dismantling white supremacy. Y'all talked about how exhausting it can be for white folks to pester Black people about how to be anti-racist, what to read, et cetera. How can I have in-depth conversations with social workers and clients and peers in general of color about the needs of communities of color in the least exhausting, tedious way for them? Should I be asking them to educate me at all? So no. And if not, isn't it helpful yet insufficient to just, yes, to the second part of Patrick, but no, should not be requesting for those impacted to educate any of us. That I can use myself as an example. If there are things like, for me, learning more about the Black trans movement and community, I am not then gonna go to Black trans folks and be like, I need you to educate me on what impacts you in your communities. I'm not gonna do that. And so it's the same for anybody, right, who is trying to gain greater understanding of how they can be of good duty and service to a cause or a group that they have some level of commitment to. But it is incredibly exhausting, but it's also incredibly joyful for me to be a Black person, but exhausting nonetheless. And a lot of that just comes from continuously dealing with racial trauma, right? Like, it's been a part of my experience for the last 33 years of my life. I was born into trauma. I deal with it every day from institutional racism, right? Witnessing racism in my community, on the internet, at my job, right? So that's the exhausting piece. And so what really gets frustrating is people come in and ask, well, can you help me understand? No, I can't. You're never going to be able to understand. You're never going to be able to understand. You don't have to live it, and you don't have to experience it, and you weren't born into it. But it doesn't mean that you can't find something, right? What is the thing that pisses you off about racism or oppression that you want to see change? And you don't need Black folks to tell you that. You don't need brown folks to tell you that. I think we all know the things that piss us off about stuff that we want to see change. And then how do we use our power to call for that? But yes, definitely don't ask Black folks to educate y'all. That's a surefire way to possibly get cussed out when you probably didn't even want to get cussed out. Don't do it. Another question that I got ahead of time says, what advice would you give to up and coming Black female social workers? That you're needed, and that you're incredibly valuable, but also a lot of the things that probably brought you to the work in terms of, the institutional injustices or the systemic issues are, like I said before, they're not your problem to solve for. And I really wish I would have known that as a younger Black female social worker. I thought I had to solve for institutional challenges when that's not my responsibility, number one. Number two, I can't, right? But because I know that I'm important in this work and I'm valuable in this work, the things that I can do is navigate the system and call out and call in the oppression when I see it, the microaggression when I see it, but not always have the solution. Don't have to have it. I'm gonna tell you what's going on, right? You have the perspective, you have the experiences, you have the lived experience. And so I've gotten increasingly comfortable over the last year of allowing my lived experience, to operate like a street PhD. Am I ever gonna go back to school and probably get a PhD? Not if I gotta pay for it, I'm not gonna do it. But all these years of being a Black woman, being a Black social worker in practice, right, every single day with a different perspective, I have value, I have experience, right, that I can contribute in ways that other people can't, that other people cannot. I can also connect with groups of people that other folks cannot. And so there's privilege and power in being a Black female social worker, but the perspective of it all is that you don't have to solve for the institutional racism and oppression that folks that look like you experience when they come on the receiving end of whatever service you're providing or however you practice in this field. Did I hear someone come off mute? Please feel free to drop any more questions you might have in the chat box, or you can raise your hand and come off mute.
We have another couple, Kim, in the chat box. One's from Destiny and one from Savannah.
Beautiful. Thank you. So I will read the one from Destiny for those who can't see it. It says, thank you so much for sharing your insight and toolkit for thriving as a social worker. I wanted to ask, in what ways have you learned to practice self-advocacy? Also, how have you overcome feelings of not belonging? I am also a first-gen undergrad American, so I feel like I often struggle with those feelings and just wanted to learn more about how you dealt with those sentiments. So in terms of how I learned to practice self-advocacy, I got frustrated with myself for not doing it when it mattered the most, right? I'm not much of a talker. I am much more like I make things actionable, I make things happen, but I'm really good at doing that for other people. I'm not that good at doing it for myself. And so the ways that I have learned to practice self-advocacy is I made a commitment to myself that I matter. And once I unselfishly made the decision that I matter more than this work, more than my client population that I love deeply, then from that point, I refused not to advocate for myself. So that the way I practiced self-advocacy was to unapologetically continue to tell myself that I matter more than this field, I matter more than this work. And so from that point, I refused not to be able to advocate for what I needed. And in terms of overcoming feelings of not belonging, you know, people talk a lot about imposter syndrome. But I believe that I understand imposter syndrome is like white supremacy telling me I don't belong, that I'm not good enough, that I don't matter. And once I accepted that even though white supremacy is, you know, baked into policies and all this other kind of stuff, it's also an illusion. They made it up. And so once I was like, they done made this stuff up, and then I can check the voice in the back of my head that's trying to tell me that I don't belong, but like, well, that's made up too. And so that's how I have been able to kind of move through and overcome these feelings of not belonging, is to understand that I do belong and that I do matter. And the reason that it's so hard for me to, I guess, stand and take up all this space, there's a reason people don't want me to. And I'm a whole Capricorn. I'm very stubborn. So if you tell me that you don't want me to do something, or that I cannot do something, I'm gonna do it. And so a lot of it is just the conversations that I have in my head about you belong, you matter, despite what all these things are telling you, those narratives are false, like take up all this space. And so the part about being a first gen, it's tough. Because you don't have, I know for me, I didn't have anybody in my family to compare my experience to. And that can get very lonely. Because, you know, you can be around people in your cohort in undergrad or grad school who they don't share that story with you. But for me, it was very lonely to not be able to have anybody within my family to share my experience with. But now on the other side of that, like, it's very empowering to know that within my family, I'm tangible to my cousins, right, of multiple generations. An example like, well, you know, Kim is a doctor. I ain't no doctor though. You can do it too. And so I think it's natural to have all of these thoughts and these feelings, but don't shame yourself for them. Welcome them. Don't let them stay too long. Don't get comfortable in the feelings of not belonging or not feeling like you can't speak up or say things. Just let them stay for a little bit and just let them go. But you don't shame yourself for having those feelings. Savannah, earlier you said rage is an energy. Rage is energy filled. Love that. Okay. How can you utilize rage without letting it consume you? You got to understand that even though rage is an energy field, is a source of energy, you know, we have seen what can happen when people channel their rage to cause harm towards themselves and towards other people. We see that. We see it in our client populations. You might see it in your communities. You might see it in yourself, in your family, and students. You might see it all over the place. But the moment we can discover and rechannel rage, and Dr. Kenneth Hardy, who does a lot of work around racial trauma with Black youth or youth in inner city environments, he talks about one of the ways to heal racial trauma is to rechannel rage. So anybody who's a part of like a marginalized group or has a marginalized experience naturally probably has rage. And the way we can begin to, number one, not let it consume us is to acknowledge that we have it and then decide, what do you want to do with it? Right, got to validate your experiences with rage. You have it, cool. Now that you know you have it, what you want to do with it? And sometimes the question is real simple. You want to cause harm towards you, yourself, you know, to yourself, others, and community, or you want to create change with it? Those are kind of your options when it comes to rage. And so the way that I have not allowed it to consume me is I understand that my rage is channeled towards creating change and impact. But I also check, right, with acceptance, what I'm actually able to do to create change. I can't do it all. I can't fight for everything, but I can do something, but I can't do it all. So I check the rage by understanding that I use it for making change happen and calling for action, but I balance it against this idea that I can't do everything. And so that's the way that I don't allow it to consume me, is I stay realistic and pragmatic, but I welcome the rage and I don't shame it. I'm going to move to a question that I have pre-prepared. Once again, please feel free to drop any that you may have in the chat box, or if you want to come off mute, I invite you to do that as well. Where are we at? What do you know now, after being in the profession over a decade, that you wish you would have known when you first became a social worker? I wish I really would have known how white it was. I really do. I really wish I would have known just how white the social work profession was, because then it probably would have helped me manage my expectations of what was possible and what I could actually do and where I could fit and find my way. But because I just had no idea, y'all, I had no, remember, I didn't know what social work was until after I graduated and started working. I had no idea how white social work was. And when I tell you it hit me like a ton of bricks, my first year of my foundation year of my MSW program, and then at my field placements, and then once I started working, it hit me like a ton of bricks. And I really wish I would have known, because I would have been able to manage my expectations. And I think my heart probably wouldn't have been broken as hard as it was in 2018 when I came to the realization that this field was not everything I thought it was. But I still love it, but it wasn't everything I thought it was. So I really wish I would have known how white social work was as a younger social worker. And I think this is the last question that I have prepared, or that was sent to me. It says, what advice would you give your younger self? In other words, how do I navigate academia / the field of social work as a Black woman? I want to do more than just survive. I would probably tell my younger self to take up all the space. Courageously take up all the space, even if it means you're alone at times, or if people just misunderstand you. I definitely would have spoken to my younger self to also tell her to be a bit more kind to herself. Very kind to other people, didn't give it to myself. And to take up all the space and to rest. I really wish the young me knew about rest and that you didn't have to earn it, and how necessary it is for preservation. So I would say take up all the space, be kind to yourself, very forgiving to yourself, and to rest, especially as a Black woman. Rest. I think I see question.
There's one from me.
Okay.
And then there's one from Rachel.
All right, so I'll hit those up. It says, I sometimes hear from social work students who are BIPOC that processing racial trauma while studying or being a social worker can be overwhelming. What are your thoughts about this or advice? It can be incredibly overwhelming because I imagine for many, it might be the first time you might be getting language for some of your experiences that you had before getting into your programs. And so it's like this recognition of trauma that you knew you were going through something or experiencing it, but didn't have words for it, right? Didn't understand the symptoms and how they were playing out. And then somebody all of a sudden shows you all the symptoms of racial trauma. And you'd be like, yo, that's me. And so having that recognition while also the demands of these programs in life, incredibly overwhelming. So in terms of advice, I would seek community care, because a part of healing racial trauma is to seek community, be with community. It really isn't, it's not an individual healing process for racial trauma. Racial trauma is a collective healing process. And so my biggest advice would be seek community, because you won't be able to move through it alone, nor are you experiencing it by yourself. And so by seeking community, it also just gives a place for all the rage and confusion and frustration and the sadness, for all the things to live collectively with other people. Another question. I'd love to know how you would recommend finding our specific niche and issues that we want to combat. I feel like I have at least 3 specific fields that really matter to me, but am not sure how to navigate the process of choosing where I might make the best impact as a social worker. Well, Rachel, I think it has to find you. Because look, I've been working with youth and adolescents since 2008. But when I tell y'all, I didn't like kids. I couldn't, oh my God, what? I could not stand kids. I really couldn't. And anybody who knew me before 2008 was like, yeah, she ain't lying. But now I honestly cannot imagine my life without, right? Like that population, but they literally found me. I didn't go seek them out, but I also don't have the social worker story where I dreamed of being a social worker, you know, working in foster care or working in homeless service. Like I don't have that story. So social work found me. So I think a lot of people, the field finds you, but I also think your specific kind of niche or your issue area finds you too. And it's probably the thing, it's going to be something that pisses you off. Right? Like I discovered what was happening to young people in the juvenile legal system and it made me mad. And I was like, yo, I gotta do something about this. And so like, I've been working with that population ever since. It's likely gonna be something that makes you angry about a particular issue area, or it might be a client story. They come in and tell you something, you be like, what? No, then you start making phone calls and figuring stuff out. Like that's probably going to be the moment like, oh, these are my people. This is my issue area. This is the group that I enjoy the most. So I would say pay attention to what's making you angry or what's kind of fueling your rage. That's probably the issue area that you're going to end up with the deepest level of commitment to. So I don't have any more prepared questions, nor do I see any in the chat box, but I certainly welcome any questions or reflections or insights.
We have about a little less than 20 more minutes, so we definitely have time to engage some.
Oh, Rachel, I'm just regular. Thank you, though. Nice and regular. Each of us, yeah. We're all cool and dope in our own ways.
And I also see some names on here of people who I know are not shy.
And the question, truthfully, they don't necessarily have to be related to social work school or social work profession. I've lived, I've done things, I've worked with different groups, interfaced with different populations. So your curiosity is definitely welcome. But I would tell you if I can't answer a question, I'm not gonna lie to you. I see a question. It says, not a social worker myself, but how can I best support the social work students around me when I see them struggling with the stressors of practicing social work? I would offer that you offer to help ground them. If there's anything that you can do to help ground and to validate, because this goes back to an earlier point that this can be a very thankless profession and form of work. And we can lie to ourselves and lie to other people and say that we don't need validation, but that's false. So it doesn't mean that like you're overly, nice and you're trying to get them with all these kind bombs and make things unrealistic and all this toxic positivity, but helping to ground people in their perspective of whatever their impact is as a social worker, and just validating that the work is hard, right? That the work is hard, but you're necessary. And sometimes the simplest things go the longest way. I think I see a hand raised.
Yes, hi. Thank you so much for sharing all your wisdom with us. It's been an amazing experience. So thank you for that, first of all. And then I have a question. I'm just curious, without, sharing any confidentiality or anything, would you be able to share an example with a client that you had or a group of clients where it might have been a difficult situation when you started working with them, but it turned out to be a really good, positive thing, and it ended up really well at the end? So like it started out hard for you, but at the end it turned out good. Like, you know what I'm saying?
I do. Thank you for that, Elizabeth. And I'll start by saying I work with teenagers, so they hard.
A lot of examples.
Yeah, like they are hard. But that's what I love the most. And I would often say, like, if a kid came in and they trusted me right away and they started talking, we got a problem. Like if I didn't have to work for the relationship, then I'm concerned. But a specific example is one young person who I still am in communication with today. At the time, he was 15. He lived in public housing with his mother, who's my age, and his two younger siblings. About 6 months before he started working with me, he witnessed his mom get shot in the head and two of his best friends get killed in front of his house. And when I tell you this baby was one of the brightest kids that I've ever had the privilege of knowing, but he struggled in school. A lot of it was from chronic absenteeism. He was behind, even though he was brilliant. And he had also been dealing with community violence for like 5-6 years, since when he was living in public housing. And then his dad was also murdered a year and a half before his mom was shot in the head. So long story short, you think he know how to trust? The answer is no. The baby did not know how to trust. And so when I started working with him, he checked me in a way that I am so grateful for to this day. And I still thank him for that. Because I came into the sessions and I wasn't fully settled into my career and like being comfortable in therapy, but I came into the sessions with a plan for how they're going to go, right? All these interventions that we can do together. And one day he just looked at me and said, "Ms. Young, you fake." I said, "Who, me?" I'm fake? He was like, yeah, you fake. I would say, well, tell me more about that. Like, what makes you feel or believe that I'm fake? He was like, you be using all these words. These words don't mean nothing to me. I was like, okay. And so when he was honest with me, right, and he checked me, I was able to really see him for who he was, and we connected in a way that it got to the point where he would come for his sessions and just sleep on my floor. He would just come and sleep on the floor. And that's when I knew, oh, he trusts me. Right? Because to talk is relatively easy, but when your body is filled with trauma, to sleep in the presence of someone else is hard. And so when I would just let him come to his sessions, he would sleep on the floor. Of course, I would write the note that said, utilize intervention for X, Y, and Z, submitted for billing. You know how that go. But he would come to the sessions and sleep on the floor. It eventually moved into him being able to tell me things that he wouldn't share with anyone else. And it got us to this place of a relationship where my baby graduated from high school last year and is currently enrolled at a junior college. So he allowed me to stay in his life. He let me in his life, but he also told me the truth about myself, right? So it was difficult. This joker wasn't talking to me. He wasn't coming to his sessions, but I also went into his neighborhood and be like, bro, like, where are you at? Like, you know, your session at 3:30 today, get in the car, right? Or like, I would go to his house when he wouldn't get up for school in the morning and be like, so I heard you need a ride. Let's go, right? And so I think for any of us who are finding our way in this work with whatever our population is, it's going to require you to use other parts of yourself that you're not going to learn in a textbook. It's going to require you to use your human side to fully engage with the populations that you serve, to see them as people, but to also care about them as people. And it is okay to care about your clients. You need to care about your clients. So yeah, that I would say that is one of the stories that sticks out for me. And that sugar, I'm so proud of him to this day.
Thank you for that.
Yeah. Said Ebony has a question. I teach practice and field in the program. She said, hey to her students. Thank you for the practice wisdom and regular wisdom that you have shared with us today. I like to ask, what are the parts of what you do that brings real joy now, if you're willing to share? Oh, one of the things that brings me tremendous joy is reallocating rich people's money to people in the community. Yeah, I have found so much joy in being proximate to philanthropists and helping them get their money from them and funnel it directly into grassroots organizations that don't even have 501c3 or LLC status. That gives me so much joy. So that, as well as, you know, Lifetime channel movies, riding in my car, listening to music, but I really love taking money from rich people and directly giving it to community. Like that brings me so much joy. Let's see, another question. I'm a young Black, freshly graduated MSW, currently in my first job in the field. It's a very white setting. I find myself very stressed and often stretching myself thin. How do you suppose I ease my imposter syndrome and anxiety on the job? Do you have any quick sayings or quotes I can remember to ease my anxiety throughout the day? Also, thank you for your time. I would say, I don't know how this might feel for other people, but sometimes I just have to keep things in perspective in terms of like things that I say in my head. One thing that I use, and I rolled it over from when I was taking my clinical exam, when my anxiety got real high, when I was taking the state board exam, and I had to like write on the whiteboard and remind myself in my head that dumber people have passed. And so like when you find yourself in some of these situations, especially where you may not feel like you belong, or you may, you know, feel out of place, or this idea of the imposter syndrome is kind of persistent, sometimes the quote that you tell yourself is just to boost who you are. Like, girl, I'm better than this job. And sometimes that's probably the truth. These people don't know what they're doing. And that's probably the truth. And it's okay if you got to say it to yourself to make it through the day. It don't always have to be the biggest positive thing where the grass is greener if I stay calm, or I need this job to do X, Y, and Z. Sometimes you just got to ground yourself in what the truth is to help ease the anxiety. And for me, humor is how I help to manage or ease some of the anxious or overwhelming thoughts that I have. But in terms of feeling stretched and stretching yourself too thin, that may have something to do with how you're interpreting the responsibilities of your role, and if you might be stepping outside of the boundaries of how you should be practicing for that job. Because at the end of the day, it's just a job. So if you're stretching yourself too thin for a job, it's probably more to do with boundaries than it does to necessarily do with the environment or imposter syndrome. No one should be stretching themselves thin for a job. Because if you stretch yourself too thin and you break and you leave or you're fired, they're just going to replace you. So do not stretch yourself too thin at a job. It's a job. There are more jobs. You can also leave that job if you feel it is necessary and possible for you. And that's something else I wish I would have told my younger self instead of staying in a place that I should not have stayed, is that it is possible to leave jobs. I think that's the last one I see in the chat box. Did I miss something?
I don't think so. I think you got them.
Right.
Oh, wait. There's another one.
Oh, Melody. To go off of the boundary comment, was it difficult to establish boundaries with clients or in the field? Do you have any recommendations for establishing boundaries? Even younger in my career, working with youth, I didn't really have a hard time establishing boundaries. I've seen people struggle with it, and I've also seen having poor boundaries cause people to lose their jobs. But in terms of it being difficult, I think a lot of it has to do with one's confidence and security with the population that they're working with and the knowledge they have of whatever systems that group is connected with. But in terms of recommendations for establishing boundaries, I encourage people to learn about the different types of boundaries and then take an inventory of which ones you struggle with the most, right? So there's intellectual boundaries, time boundaries, emotional boundaries, physical boundaries, sexual boundaries, and there might be one more that I'm missing, but there's like 6 categories of boundaries. And so I would encourage you to take a look at all 6, some of the characteristics and traits of where one is struggling with those things or doing well with those things, and focus on what you need to focus on. Like for me, it's time boundaries, right? And it's me making sure that I don't allow other people to cross my time boundaries. I'm really good with all the other ones, physical, intellectual, emotional, but like time boundaries is where I struggle. I give of my time entirely too much. But I would say a recommendation is to learn about the different type of boundaries, offer yourself grace, but then also pay attention to where you need to focus the most, because it may not be all 6, it might just be a few or just one. But it is so important that you establish boundaries with clients, and that's for your safety and sanity and also their safety, but also because the profession is incredibly regulated and people can sue, to be honest. So just some insider information, like as a licensed clinical social worker, I carry a $5 million malpractice insurance policy because it's a very litigious society and people will sue you. And there are so many ways that regulatory boards kind of say what is and what can't happen. When is a boundary violated? When do we have to go in front of the board for a hearing? All these types of things. And so it's just also being mindful of that as you're forming your identities as social workers. Is unfortunately, we are a part of an incredibly regulated profession, and we can't be with people how we probably need to be with people to kind of help them throughout whatever their personal journeys are.
That's, I think, about what we have time for. I just want to thank Kim so much for being here and providing this information to us and then discussing with us. This has been amazing. And Kim, do you have any parting words for us or for the students, especially the students?
Look, y'all, this is not, even though it's not easy, it's so worth it. It really is. Even it's not easy. It's a lot that I can only imagine what you're dealing with when I think about what I dealt with when I was going through my program, both professionally and personally. It's not easy, but it's so worth it. But at the same time, feel courageous enough to identify how you want to identify as a social worker and not how our programs try to tell us we need to identify as a social worker. You get to decide that. And so know you have that power to make that choice, and whatever it is you do decide, you're needed to practice that way and to be that way with people. And don't forget, you're a revolutionary. We're more than just social workers, y'all. We are revolutionaries. So hold that in your hearts as well.
Thank you so very much. And everybody in the chat too. Kim, I hope you have a chance to scroll through it to see what everybody's saying. Thank you everybody who was here with us this evening. We're so glad you were here and able to join us for this conversation. This has been recorded, so we'll post it at some point for internal use within the school. And that's it for us tonight. So good night, y'all.